So this is what we're looking to achieve, quilt as you go. We're adding binding strips on to join our blocks together. If I put a few together you can actually see, and there it is on the back. As with everything, practice makes perfect, so don't stress too much if you struggle to start with. So first of all we need one of our 1.5 inch strips, our folded strips, and we're just going to cut it a bit longer than our block. And we also want the same with a 1 inch strip. We will be trimming these off afterwards. So I am using my walking foot because I can get a 1/4 inch seam allowance on it. The stitch length is lower than it would normally be. So for our first block, you're going to put the folded one on top and your 1 inch one goes on the back, and you're going to line it up so all the raw edges are together, and I'm going to just do that as I go on the machine. So I'm just going to line up my edges, line up with the edge of my foot, needle is down, and while it's on here I'm going to make sure it's straight and all my edges line up, and I'm going to keep doing that on the way down. I've got a stitch length of 2, and the reason it's going to be shorter than we normally do on a thicker one is that we want this to be secure and, oops, needles unthreaded. As we will be putting a bit of stress on it as we fold it over. There we go. So making sure it's lined up. And I'm going to keep checking and lining it up every few inches, and I'm using the edge of my foot as a guide to get my 1/4 inch seam allowance. So making sure it's straight all the way down. So now I'm just going to go to the iron and I'm going to press the back over. I'm leaving the front where it is. I'm also going to pick up my second block. Okay, so there we go. I'm going to place my second block right sides face into my first one. Then going to flip it over because it's easier to stitch with the fabric on the top. So I'm going to line the edge of the fabric up with my block going down the right hand side, and I'm making sure that my block is straight and lined up at the top with the underneath block. Again, I'm going to put my needle down. Come on, play nicely. Okay, so I'm going to get your second block and you're going to turn it over to the back so the right sides of your backs are facing. To line my blocks up, I'm also going to flip it over because it's easier to stitch with the fabric on the top and also gives us a channel to put our foot down. So my foot just fits inside that channel that's left. Make sure the fabric is straight. Foot down, needles in, and there we go, just lining up the fabric. And I'm going to keep doing that as we go. And stitching all the way to the bottom. And you can see here my blocks are straight and match at the bottom. And if you have problems gripping your fabric, put your quilting gloves on, it gives you greater grip. So when you open it up now, your seam allowances will sit butted up in that space. If they don't, you've got one that's slightly bigger, just trim it, but make sure you don't trim your binding. So I'm just going to press it over on the back, and I'm going to press my binding strip at the front over. Okay then, so I'm going to fold that over. It's going to line up with your seam stitching from underneath. Just going to be stitching just inside the edge. So line it up. I have a gap in here which I'm lining the edge of my fabric up, and I'm just holding that fabric down, just making sure that it meets the stitching from underneath. Got to the end, and I'm going to rotate, and I'm going to stitch to just inside the edge on the other side, and just to balance it up so both sides look the same, I'm going to do a line of stitching on the other side of the binding. There you go, and that's your strips added, and there it is on the reverse. So you're now going to add on exactly the same way onto this side, and you're going to do that for all rows, and then you're going to trim these bits off so they're level at the end. So that's our task for this time, just to get all our blocks, our rows created, and then we'll be back soon to join our rows.